Really just now. Um, yeah, so we can do that. Uh, I don't even know if I need to do an introduction. No, I won't. I won't do an introduction.
Uh,
So tell me how the post came up and what happened from there.
I don't remember how the post came up. I don't even remember which of the many pages it was on. But the discussion had to do with, well, chosenness. And if God is God and God is omnipotent, you know, then why does God need a chosen people? What is a chosen? What's the purpose of a chosen people?
Yeah, why do you need to back one horse when you can just make all
If
the
you're God,
horses?
you can just say to the people, all human beings, all at once, here's what you need to do.
Right.
Okay, and it's actually a rather interesting development within the pages of Torah. Uh, when God creates creation, what is the single thing that appears to be on God's mind because it repeats itself in Genesis chapter 1? What is the line that keeps repeating throughout the 6 days of creation?
And it was good.
Exactly. God's concern is for goodness, and it's a moral, ethical goodness. And one might say, no, wait a minute, when God says the Son is good, he's not making a moral judgment, and that's true, but we're also dealing with, in the entire Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 3 verses, the issue of good and evil. And so one might say that, yes, you can't say the Son is good in a moral or ethical sense, but it still seems to be a prevalent thing on God's mind. Why does he say it's good? And there might be a moral value based on the sun, the moon, the stars, humanity, the flowers, the trees, creation.
Right, because we don't have a benchmark, right? When we read and God said it was good, we don't understand what his definition of good is and how and what the opposite of that is.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, that leads us to the first step towards showing why God needs a chosen people. Okay, first, you have to ask the question, and it's a trick question. So, Jason, you are forewarned. Did God choose the Jews? The answer is no, he did not. He chose a people who later became known as Jews. He could just as easily have chosen somebody in China, and those people, their descendants, becoming a nation, would then have been known as whatever, but they would have been the chosen people. So it's not that God chose the Jews, it's that God chose a people who later became known as Jews. Okay, so, and this is going to be something of somewhat, of some disagreement, shall we say, but if you take a look at the Bible, what is the first act that is called a sin in the Torah?
Oh, called a sin.
Yes, sir. In
So
other words, we may claim that Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. However, the biblical text never calls what they did a sin.
could I say that the act of murder is called a sin because
Exactly.
right?
The first time that God uses the word sin in the Torah has to do with with the jealousy actually of Cain for Abel, and he says, sin is crouching at the door, but you can master it. Okay, why could one say that Adam and Eve did not sin in the Garden of Eden? Isn't disobedience from God a sin? Well, disobedience is God. Disobeying God is a sin, but only if you know the difference between good and evil, and so you are making a choice between good and evil. Okay, people have dogs. They say to the dog, "Good doggy," but does that mean the dog is making a moral choice? No. The dog only knows two things. One, if I leave a present on the rug, I get a patch on the tushy with a rolled up newspaper. But if I do it outside, when I come back in, I get a treat. They're not making a moral judgment. They don't know what a moral judgment is. They're operating on instinct, okay, and learned behavior of what pleases, but they don't know goodness and evilness.
Yeah, I look at it as like a kind of rebellion. So in the dog analogy, if a
But
dog did leave a present on your carpet,
he's not rebelling.
no, he's not doing it out of spite.
And he's not rebelling.
Yeah.
And he doesn't understand good and evil. So Adam and Eve, pardon the expression, are like our animals, our pets. They didn't understand that disobeying God was wrong. How can they be held culpable for disobeying God until they ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of the difference between good and evil? Okay. When Adam and Eve are asked, okay, where are you? They try to hide. Adam, not being nice, sloughs the blame onto Eve. Eve actually, from a Jewish perspective, could be seen as a heroine, okay, as the hero of the story. With all due respect to us men, Jason, our women make us grow up. Adam, if he doesn't know the difference between good and evil and does not become culpable and responsible for his choices, is a child. So Eve, in giving Adam the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of the difference between good and evil, makes him grow up, become an adult. And that's what our women actually do for us. Okay, as a matter of fact, the question of culpability of sin really enters into it with Eve, because once Eve first took the fruit and ate it, she right then and there knew the difference between good and evil. And yet she takes the choice of giving the fruit to Adam. So Adam taking it can't be held culpable because, like Eve, when he took it, he didn't know the difference between good and evil, but Eve did. So why does Eve say, I am now going to do something that is wrong, I'm going to give Adam the fruit? It's because she knew he needed it. He needed to grow up. He needed to become responsible for his decisions between good and evil, because then he understood the difference between good and evil. In the United States, we have a defense for murder, and it's called the insanity plea. The insanity plea means that at the time the crime was committed, what? The person who did it didn't know the difference between good and evil.
Not responsible for their actions.
That's the whole point. Neither was Adam and Eve. That's why the biblical text does not call what they did a sin. The first sin is Cain's jealousy for Abel. When Cain is asked by God, where is your brother? Why is it that Cain doesn't say, you want to know where he is? I buried him over there. Why does he not say, nobody told me murder was bad? What is it about him that because mommy and daddy ate the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of the difference between good and evil, why does he try to dodge the subject? What does he have that enables him to know he has done something wrong?
Guilt.
And the guilt comes from what aspect of our psyche? What do we say we have?
Like a conscience, right?
Exactly. From God's perspective, who is very worried about his creation, the first line of defense against immoral behavior is the conscience. But the conscience isn't enough because Cain went ahead and murdered Abel. Okay, it's interesting, parenthetically, Cain's answer, which is usually mistranslated as, am I my brother's keeper? There's a nuance of Hebrew where the last word in a sentence is the emphasized word. Hashomer achi anochi? A better translation is not, am I my brother's keeper, but rather, God, am I my brother's keeper? Cain's response is, where were you, God? I thought you were the one who's supposed to take care of your creatures. Okay, but at any rate, that's another discussion. The point is that God's first line of defense against immoral behavior is the conscience, because Cain clearly exhibits his conscience when he tries to dodge the subject and shift blame back to God. Okay. Another trick question. After Cain murders Abel, when is the next evil in the Bible?
Oh, good grief. Are we... Oh, wow. I don't know. I want to go straight to the flood. I can't...
Guess what? You're right. Most people will say the Tower of Babel. Really? Who in the Tower of Babel lost their life because, they tried to build the tower as high as God? Nobody. That really wasn't an evil. That was just like stupidity. Okay. So the next evil is Noah. Okay. Judaism believes that God's second line of defense is, of course, the covenant God made with Noah, consisting of the seven laws of Noah, okay, which we don't have to go into, I don't think. And these become God's second line of defense against immoral behavior, because the conscience wasn't enough. So by entering into a covenant with all of the descendants of Noah, which means every human being on planet Earth, they were already in an existing covenant with God with the most minimal laws of morality that, if you stop and think about it, every society, culture, community, town, county, state, country has. The most minimal elements of a moral, ethical culture or community they've got. Okay. Except that's not the end of evil. What is the next evil after the flood?
Oh, Sodom and Gomorrah.
Obviously, yes, thank you. Okay? I know it's too late where you are to think. Okay. And I know this is a sensitive terminology, but I use it anyway. What did God learn about God's creatures at Sodom and Gomorrah? When an inventor invents something, they don't necessarily know exactly how it's going to be used, how it's going to go, but over time, like thousands of years, you pretty well get to know your invention. You pretty well know what it does, so you can start directing it towards where you want it to go and how you want to use it. And that's how I see God too. And so God learns from Sodom and Gomorrah that the 7 laws of Noah are not enough in terms of making people, as a line of defense for people to have against immoral, unethical behavior. Okay. What God learns, look, I don't understand them. I don't get them. But there are people in the world who don't believe in God. I don't get it, but they don't. Okay? You can't see God. God operates on a spiritual realm, and if God communicates with us, it's got to be through physics. It's got to be through the physical world. Okay? If God wanted to prove God's existence to the universe, God has to use as a way to do it what is found in the physical universe. If it's found in the physical universe, believe me, there are scientists somewhere who would figure out a scientific way to explain it without saying God did it. If God created, all of a sudden in clear blue sky, a second moon starts revolving around the Earth, okay, that would be a pretty good proof for some people that God exists. But the scientists, because it's a physical existence of a second moon appearing from nowhere, would come up with a reason. So God can't say to a Stuart Federow directly, okay, stop doing what you're doing. What God learns from Sodom and Gomorrah is that the 7 laws of Noah are not enough. But what God learns most is that God needs other human beings to teach other human beings, and you're going to hear this line so often you're going to get sick of hearing it, that God exists and God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creatures. Which, by the way, is the raison d'etre of the Jewish people. And if you read the Aleinu, main prayer of the closing section of Jewish services, okay, there's a line in it which is L'takein olam b'malchut Shaddai. In other words, to repair the world through the rule of God. And in a lot of places now, Jason, people are saying, oh, tikkun olam this, tikkun olam that. We have to have a tikkun olam program. Where's the b'malchut Shaddai? Why are they separating out God from that line? Okay, it's almost a secularist approach. We've got to repair the world because we've got to make a better place, but the reason why we're doing it, Malchut Shaddai, kind of gets shoved to the side. At any rate, God learns from Sodom and Gomorrah that God taught human beings to teach other human beings that God exists and God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creation. People cannot believe in God, but they better believe in Stuart Federow if I put my nose 3 inches from yours and say to you, stop doing what you're doing. Which, by the way, is what we Jews are supposed to be doing. Okay? And what God also learned from Sodom and Gomorrah is that the 7 laws of Noah are not enough. God needs to increase the number of laws given to a certain group of human beings for the explicit purpose of making them different from everybody else, so that by their being inherently different from everybody else, through obedience to those laws, they become a symbol to the rest of the world that God exists and God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creation. First, it takes humans to teach other humans that God exists and God demands morality and ethics from God's creatures. Second of all, that group has to be continually, constantly evident. The way in which they are made evident is through the 613 laws, more than 7 laws of Noah. So that by doing the mitzvot, it makes us different, special. And what's the word, the one word that means different, special, set apart, distinct? Holy. God says to the Jewish people, I will make you a holy nation, a holy people. Okay, so how are we made holy, set apart, different, distinct? Through observance of the mitzvot. And by the simple observance of the mitzvot, we become set apart and different, which becomes an inherent reminder to the rest of the world that God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creatures, and that God really does exist. And I can't remember the historical event, you know me in names, but it was like the Tsar of Russia, was having trouble believing in God, and he asked someone, what's the proof? And he said, the Jews. The Jews are the proof for the existence of God. Because or Mark Twain's line about, how have the Jews survived so long? What's their secret? The secret is, God's covenant with us that promises that there'll always be a remnant. So God learns from Sodom and Gomorrah that people are needed to teach other people that God exists and God demands morality and ethics. God learns from Sodom and Gomorrah that these people have to be evident, obvious to other people. Okay? The way in which they're made obvious to other people is by the third thing that God learns, that 7 laws aren't enough, and by obedience to the commandments, we make ourselves separate and distinct from everybody else, a holy nation, and by doing so, our existence tells other people that God exists and God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creation. I told you to be tired of hearing that. Okay. By the way, it's interesting because who wants to be told they're doing something wrong or that God disapproves of? And when Jews are doing our task, our raison d'etre, l'takein olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world under the rule of God, it's going to directly lead to anti-Semitism. The hatred, soneh, of Jews, the rabbis tied to Sinai. You hear the soneh, to hate Sinai, Mount Sinai. So they hate us because we got the laws for morality and ethics, and part of that law is that, rebuke your neighbor for the evil he does, don't stand idle while your neighbor bleeds, thou shalt not murder. God is consistently telling us what to do. It's just some people decide not to listen to it. And it's our task as Jews which is why God needs a chosen people. God needs a chosen people to be constantly evident so that everybody else in the world learns the lesson that there is a God and that God demands from them morality and ethics.
Brilliant.
Did you follow all that?
I did.
By the way, it is also interesting, as I said, it kind of tells us why anti-Semitism is here. But Jason, it also tells us why you, me, everybody needs to be Jewish. Because God needs us to keep the mitzvot. Okay, if I make a covenant with you, a contract with you, a testament with you, it's not just because you're going to get something out of it, it's because I'm going to get something out of it. So when God comes to the Jews to make a covenant, it's not just for the Jews' sake, for the sake of the Jewish people, and how it will benefit them. We got to talk about that for 1 minute. But it's also because God needs it. Okay, God gets something out of it. What does God get out of our covenant when we obey it? A visible sign that God exists, and a people whose inherent behavior reminds others of that, and whose mitzvot, among other things, teaches the Jews who follow it that they have to rebuke your neighbor for their evil. You have to tell somebody when they're doing something wrong, and you have to repair the world through the rule of God, which means it explains anti-Semitism. But it also explains why God needs us to be Jewish, why God needs Jews in the world, Jews who are observant and Jews who are religious and Jews who take Judaism seriously. Another thing you have to think about quickly is that God isn't stupid. So there's inherent benefit that comes from doing the mitzvot. You know, a mezuzah on the doorpost, okay? The Bible, the Torah explicitly says, numbers, exactly why the mezuzah is up, talit is worn, because it's, I'm sorry?
And tefillin, yeah.
And it reminds us to keep the commandments. So the inherent benefit is you put up the mezuzah, you get the reminder. You don't put up the mezuzah, you don't get the reminder. Okay, so God incorporates as a natural effect of keeping the commandments explicit benefits that accrue to the people who follow them. Okay, why do we want our kids to have after-school sports and athletics and activities? Because it's a discipline. If you're disciplined in one thing, you'll be disciplined in many things. If you're disciplined in many things, you are more likely to succeed in life. So anything that teaches us to discipline ourselves. So there's an inherent benefit, for example, in keeping kosher. Keep kosher, get the benefit of learning self-control. Okay. Fastest way to make a person lose weight, have them start thinking of all the things they shouldn't be eating as treif. Someone who keeps kosher doesn't even think about eating pig. Doesn't cross their mind. But they'll eat, hot fudge sundae. Get them in their mind to think hot fudge sundae is not kosher. Okay, that they can be disciplined for. Because
that should be a sin. It should be a sin to convince somebody that hot fudge sundaes.
The need for the Jewish people first explains anti-Semitism. Okay, but it also tells us why we should be Jewish. And God, not being stupid, not only gives us the laws because it makes us separate, holy, distinct, apart from everybody else, which makes us the reminder God needs to the rest of the world that God exists and God demands moral and ethical behavior from God's creation. Okay, but there's also explicit benefit for the person who does them to make it more likely that we'll keep the commandments so that we become the reminder to the rest of the world.